Hello, everybody. Welcome to another exciting episode of JavaScript Jabber. I am Steve Edwards, the host with the face for radio and the voice for being a mime. And if you're watching on TV, you can see that. And I'm here with co-panelist Mr. Dan Shapir. How you doing, Dan?
I'm doing great. Hi from Tel Aviv.
Is it still hot and dry? Or how's things going?
Isn't it always?
Oh yes, yeah. We got up in the 90s Fahrenheit here recently, but it's a little cooler and cloudier today, which is always a bummer. But anyway, our special guest is Mr. Ryan Christian. How you doing, Ryan?
Doing great, thank you.
So before we dive into the topic of Preact, why don't you tell people who you are, why you're famous, why they should give you money, where they can give you money, etc.
Oh man, I wish.
Well, aren't all the people working on open source super rich?
Yeah. I hear the Laravel guy has a Lambo. I'm still waiting for mine to come in.
Still waiting for yours?
For one.
Did you?
Yeah.
Okay.
So my name's Ryan Christian. I'm a core maintainer of Preact and have been for the past about 4.5 years now. Preact, for those unaware, is a JavaScript UI library. And as the name sort of suggests, it is largely API compatible with React and shares a lot of similarities with it in terms of how you use it and some of the API constructs. I guess where we diverge a little bit, just give a little bit more information, is we're kind of more focused on size. The core library is about 4 KB these days, 4.5 KB, contrary to our marketing line, which will be updated shortly. And we also kind of focus on performance a little bit more heavily than React does. In that terms, React, I think, comes about across the wire about 60 KB these days, 58. So there's a quite big floor and difference in terms of the size of the libraries and how they can be used.
So I have to ask a question about that. I know that, well, first of all, going back a little bit in history, Preact was created originally by Jason Miller.
Mm-hmm.
And as I recall, he created it because his attitude was that in order to properly understand something, he needs to effectively rebuild it. And he rebuilt it so well that it became very successful in and on its own. By the way, we were talking about this before we started recording. I don't think people necessarily realize how popular Preact actually is. In terms of, by the way, you called it a library. Why don't you call it a framework?
I guess my view is, I guess the older view of a library is something you call and something you use, you manage to put in your existing app or however you want to do it. We generally don't prescribe solutions. We don't require you to use it in certain ways. It's a set of toolkits that you can use however you see fit, which from my understanding is, or my use, I suppose, is better fit towards the library side of the spectrum than framework.
Hmm.
But it's nuanced and
Yeah,
different
it is
definitions.
nuanced. I use the kind of definitions that I used to use was that with and I know that a lot of people still use them. AJ, for example, I know likes to use this distinction, is that with a library, your application code calls into the library, and with a framework, it's the framework that calls into your application code.
Mm-hmm.
I've kind of modified the way that I look at it. The way that I look at it is that frameworks prescribe certain architectures, whereas libraries do not. So that's kind of the distinction that I make these days. So you would say that Preact does not kind of
It does not,
prescribe a
no.
certain architecture?
No. I mean, we generally leave that up to users. They can decide how to do it. We're only concerned with components and how you build out your VDOM library and whatnot, or VDOM tree, excuse me.
So
it's
coming from the view standpoint, I haven't really developed with React and myself, so I'm just curious, trying to understand how Preact works with React. So if I have a Preact project in my package.json, do I only have Preact, and then that depends on the React library, or how is it that you have this much smaller version of React? Does it have all the functionality of React itself, or just a limited set of functionality?
Sure. So that's a great question. Preact core itself, Preact is split into a bunch of sub packages. We have the main Preact library that you install, and that comes with a core of, like I'd mentioned, about 4.5 KB of content that is mostly focused on class components. However, we have add-ons which add different API constructs, such as Preact/hooks. So it's installed with the Preact library and bundled into the Preact library. But hooks, you have an optional add-on. Compat is another thing that we look at. So our compatibility with React comes from another sub-package, Preact Compat, which is about 95% compatible with React. But we diverge in some pretty big ways, namely around the event system. React uses their own synthetic event system. They do not use the vanilla events that you find in the DOM.
They still do?
Yeah. And they'll probably have to do so forever because that would be one hell of a breaking change at this point. So that is a huge massive code, and where a bunch that size comes from. I know a couple of years ago is something like 20, 25 KB just for the event system. They also do a bunch of event delegation by default, which again is just more code, as well as a lot of their newer concurrent features. So you can have like two different trees rendered or in memory at one point. We don't do that. We are generally more focused on web standards and keeping the kind of core library small. So the core is kind of focused, but we do have compatibility with React, and that just links into existing React libraries that you might have in your package, JSON or whatever, and kind of converts the React VDOM shape and the React constructs and some of the React ideas into what Preact understands. So if you have a Preact project, you're only using Preact. We alias out React for Preact Compat, if that makes sense.
So then Preact itself is small, but you still got some other dependencies. Is that
sort of?
correct?
Those dependencies are in Preact. I mean, those dependencies are part of Preact. Our compatibility layer is part of Preact.
Yeah,
and
just
so you
to
can
make
bring
it
any.
clear, because you kind of you alluded to it, and it's important to make this point. Preact is not dependent on React in any way, shape, or form. When you use the project with Preact, it's just Preact. It's compatible with React. It's not built on React.
Yeah,
Okay.
Completely separate things.
So you're basically just taking the most important stuff and put it in a separate that has the similar, functionality. It's almost like you're mimicking it.
Yeah.
In a much smaller form.
Yeah, exactly. We take the APIs and we mimic them and try to recreate them in a smaller form that works for our needs.
Okay.
So you can bring all that React knowledge and still be effective and functional.
Okay.
So I've not used Preact in a while, to my detriment. So we were talking before about the usage. The fact is that Preact is the number one framework / view library out there. It's used as much as all the other frameworks combined, just so we have a total size. Vue is about somewhere between 40% and half. The numbers I'm using are from the Google Crux, which basically looks at the numbers of origins. You can have other measurements like the number of NPM downloads and stuff like that. I guess they're kind of aligned, but probably a bit different. Vue is like about somewhere between half and 40% of React, and Preact is about 30% of React, which doesn't leave a whole lot for all the other frameworks. When you think about it. But it does mean that Preact is a third of React, which is the leading front-end framework, which is a lot. You're used by thousands of sites and web applications. Hundreds of thousands, I would say.
And there's something a little bit more interesting there is because Preact has this focus on small size, it is especially well suited for widgets. I think a number of major websites use Preact on it, to the point where Jason quotes a figure, Jason Miller, who created it, quotes figure that Preact can be found on about 6% of sites these days, or major sites used. So this isn't necessarily as the main view library or the main driver of all interactivity, but that it can be found on a huge portion of the web, just because it could be used for those kind of small self-contained widgets.
So that kind of brings out the point that I was thinking about, because these days, when you consider this typical size of a web site or certainly of a web application,
Mm-hmm.
they're pretty huge.
Yeah.
And they're huge mostly because of either user code or because of the whole bunch of NPM stuff that people just bundle into their web applications. To the extent that the 20 to 30K difference between Preact and React is not necessarily a whole lot at the end of the day. Or do you disagree?
Well, it's closer to 50K these days. And sure, when you start building massive websites, that is indeed going to be swallowed up by node modules or user code. I was looking at the OpenAI site the other day, and I think it downloads something like 3 megs of JavaScript. 50 KB is not going to make a difference there. But it is,
gzip 3 megs or
yeah, yeah, it
whoa.
has no code splitting whatsoever. So it
Oh,
loads
wow.
absolutely everything. Did you guys not see that? There was the article between Sam Altman and Joni Ive that came out a couple of weeks ago. It's a static page, just has a single bib text, single video, and it loads 3 megs of JavaScript because it's a Next.js app with no code splitting whatsoever. So it loads all of the Chat GPT and stuff into it. It's bad.
Wow.
Yeah, but so 50K,
Who
sure, it's
cares
not.
about performance? Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so yeah, in that case, it's not going to make a difference, and we don't proclaim that it would. We don't proclaim that Preact, adding swapping out React and switching Preact is going to change anything on its own. However, it does vastly reduce the floor. Um, I know Alex Russell of previous Chrome fame, and now he works on Blink, comes
Was
out
a guest
with,
on this podcast several times.
yeah,
Great
he
guy.
comes out every couple of years with a JavaScript budget to kind of talk about what should be our height of JavaScript for the current low end devices and users. And 50 KB in terms of those budgets, which I think are about 300K these days, 300 KB. 50K is quite a bit. That is 1/6 your total budget that could be reduced if you did switch to Preact. And that could be 50K on every page, combined with some other opportunities. It adds some extra room to add UX features or DX stuff on
Oh,
top,
for
which would be
sure.
nice.
And like you also said, it's a very interesting use case is the widget scenario where you want to add something to a page that already potentially has some framework on it, and you
Mm-hmm.
don't want to overload that page even more.
Exactly, yeah. That's quite useful for that.
Now, you did mention that in terms of the way that the core Preact works, you're still focused on class components rather than hooks.
Yeah.
Are most people using Preact with, as far as you know, with classes or with hooks? Because with React itself, it's hooks all the way these days.
Yeah, so I think hooks are definitely more popular. And I should mention signals. It's another kind of state primitive we added on top a couple years ago. You can use those with function components or class components. They're kind of their own separate thing. Um, But while hooks are popular, they are just an optional add-on in Preact. So you can use hooks if you want them. If you don't want them, they're going to cost nothing to your bundle. They are in a subpath. So you can say, hey, I just want the lightest toolkit that I can use. So you just use the core Preact library and just use class components. Get what you need done. And that's kind of the interesting way that Preact is structured. We have a pluggable renderer with a public API. So people can come and add existing like add-ons and state primitives tying into the render cycle if they want. And they can use the exact same tools that we use to build out our add-ons like compat, hooks, signals more recently, all that stuff. It's all power of public API.
Now, looking at the directions in which React is moving, and I'm kind of interested in contrasting some of them with Preact,
Hmm.
especially since, per our conversation before, you're about to release a new version of Preact pretty soon.
Yep.
One of the core things about React for several years now, and I think you mentioned it, is the whole fiber thing and the concurrent stuff, and suspense and stuff like that. Do you have anything like suspense built into Preact?
Yeah, suspense has been part of Preact for years now. It is essentially in the same state that is in React, more or less. You can use it for all sorts of things like lazy loading, data fetching, asynchronous actions, and whatnot. That's all there. Um, we, however, are less interested in following React into things like concurrent mode and concurrent features. Um, their implementation of server components. Um,
Yeah, we'll get to that. Put
okay.
that to the side because I will want to go there. But just to clarify to our listeners who may or may not know, suspense is basically about making the rendering of certain things, certain components, asynchronous to the rest of the page, and they can have a loading state while they're getting retrieving the data, and they don't block the rest of the page. And when they get the data, they can then update themselves with the data. I like to say that the way that you can identify modern web applications is that instead of one big spinner, we now have lots of little spinners.
Yeah. Um,
Yeah, that was actually one I've talked about this before on Views on View, and it might have been here, but View 3 added that feature. So it's native. It's just super easy now to say, okay, while it's loading, show this. And then once it's loaded, then show the data. Where before it was like, okay, set a loading variable. Okay, so it's loading. So show this GIF. And now it's loaded. So you can unset that variable and show the data. And so it was a very, very nice convenience feature added to View 3.
yeah. In React and Preact, there are certainly more performance considerations with it, especially just the way it works, as promises are essentially thrown up through the component tree. Um, we don't necessarily love it as a primitive. It certainly has some bad performance foot guns, but it is something that's been the framework for years, and you can make use of it intelligently.
So, what do you kind of recommend it potentially instead?
Generally, extracting all sorts of data fetching out of the render tree entirely. This is something that Jason has talked about a bit on, I think, like his V talk of last year, so 2024. It's something that the Remix guys have been talking about for a while, in that if you put your data fetching at the component level, you're only going to trigger those requests as or once the page loads, um, and that creates waterfalls and all sorts of delays that could otherwise be avoided by hoisting. So you take all those data fetches, you create either like a page level loader or just manual hoisting with things like fetch or GraphQL is great for this, and you extract that completely outside the render tree, um, and have it live outside entirely. So you load the main bundle, you fire off all those fetches, and once you get that data, then you start rendering.
And then how do you propagate the data into the components? Or put it in an alternative way, what state management solutions do people usually use on the client side with Preact in order to propagate this data into the components?
The context API is great. Context API has been there forever, and you can initialize your app, just pass data into the root app component. Signals in more recent years have been great for that too. So signals are a reactivity primitive that we added in September of 2022. So you can very, very easily have state that exists outside of your tree. It's reactive. You can change it however you want. And there's also tie-in to the component lifecycle. So when that data changes, components will update themselves or update text content, whatever. So they can tie into that
So,
global store idea.
so we had Joe Savona and Satya on this show a while back, and one of the things that came up in the conversation were signals, and
Mm.
Joe was pretty frank on the point that React is not going to support signals. It's not part of their vision, or actually, put it more accurately, he said if signals becomes a core feature of JavaScript itself, then they will support the JavaScript signals, but otherwise they don't plan to integrate signals into React. I know that, like you mentioned, Preact has had signals for a while now.
Mhm.
Are signals in Preact used to trigger the re-render of a component?
So yes and no. So signals have a very deep integration with React. We do actually, with Preact, excuse me. We do also have a React integration. So if users wanted, we do have a signals integration that they can use. But for Preact, there's kind of two modes where you can use a signal within your JSX as a direct text binding or a attribute binding, in that if that signal updates, it will change only, say, like a text value within the JSX. It will
Hmm.
not re-render the entire component. It does that at the granular, very specific level.
So what is known as fine-grained reactivity?
Yes, exactly.
Cool.
You can, if you want to reference the signal, unwrap it within the actual component function, and that will subscribe the component essentially to the signal and will re-render it. You don't need to do that. You don't necessarily need to use the fine-grained reactivity. Our signals implementation isn't necessarily focused on fine-grained reactivity as other tools like Solid kind of focus on. I think Svelte's runes are similar. Our signals are meant to complement VDOM and provide a more performant solution to those cases where you do want fine-grained reactivity, when that could be valuable. But you're not throwing out, the baby with the bathwater. You still do have the component model. You still have re-renders. That's still a kind of primitive and solid building block to build on.
Hmm. So basically, you're saying that in terms of context, when I need to propagate updates throughout the component tree, I would either use something like context or signals as the means of getting the data from whatever state management solution I choose to use to the components themselves.
Yeah, those are the kind of favored ways these days. And signals along those lines are interesting because you could just directly import the signal. You don't need, like a use context hook or anything. You can just have a bare signal in a module, import in that signal, and use it in your component and its reactivity.
Hmm. Very good. By the way, do you have anything similar to 10 stack query, what used to be React query?
Um, no, we don't have anything built in. I think it works fine with our compatibility layer. So as we kind of mentioned earlier, users can add Tanstack query to their app. They set up the Preact aliases, so that just swaps out references of React with Preact compat in their build tool of choice, and it should just work.
Hmm. Now, in recent years, React has been really focused, it seems, on transitioning from being a Vue library into becoming a full stack framework.
Yeah.
Um, some might say that Next.js is kind of the future of React in a lot of ways,
Mhm.
and some of the React core team members have indeed moved to Vercel. And the vision includes stuff like React server components, like server actions. In a lot of ways, Next.js is backend first.
Mhm.
Everything first runs on the backend, and you actually need to explicitly specify that from beyond this point, things will start executing on the client side. Um, I gather that that's not the direction that you're going
No,
down with Preact.
no. A lot of the ideas that the React team has presented over the years are interesting. Server components as an idea are interesting, um, but we're definitely not looking to follow them down that path in any way. Um, I guess a big thing for us is a lot of our users don't use Preact in a way where they want a framework. They want to be able to just grab it, add it into their existing stack, their existing solutions. So that sort of framework and prescribed, way to build apps just wouldn't fly, even if we did offer it, and no one's asking for it. So we're not going to follow that kind of path.
Yeah. So about my own experience, about a year ago, I switched jobs, and because of the type of roles that I do, it was not only me being interviewed by various companies, but also me kind of interviewing those various companies.
Mhm.
And one of the things that I was looking at was their technological stack, and the majority of them were using React, but essentially none of them, the companies that I talked to, were using server components or stuff like that. So it's interesting to me that there seems to be a kind of a growing gap between how the market is using React and how and the direction in which the React core team and Vercel are actually
Mhm.
taking React. And it seems to me that Preact remains much closer to the way in which most companies are using React than React itself.
Yeah, and along those lines, that's actually kind of one of the things we're looking at for our upcoming version 11. So we're kind of thinking about our tagline, and I know one of the suggestions was bring your React 17, 18 knowledge and have a good time. Um, because
Where's
yeah,
the rim shot, Steve? Too late, too late.
Sorry.
Uh,
Sorry, I was slacking
uh,
in my DJ responsibilities there. There we go.
yeah.
So yeah, we are kind of focusing more on that experience that Classic React has, just because that's where we find most of the users are, and as you said, most of the people that we talk to, anyways, aren't using React in that context anyway. So Preact not having it isn't a problem for them. If anything, they kind of like that our engineering talent isn't spent on features that they can't use or don't want to use. That's
Hmm.
spent on other stuff. So
So before we move over to the new version of Preact, the one more question that I wanted to ask, though, there are people who do want or like using a Vue library in the context of a full stack framework.
mhm.
And if those people look at Preact, what do you guys kind of recommend as the stack framework of choice in this scenario?
Sure. So Astro has been great, and very much aligns with our vision of trying to minimize JavaScript on the web and really utilizing web primitives. Um, Astro is great and definitely something I recommend. Dino's Fresh is also something along this same lines, similar to Astro, and that's focused on islands of interactivity and kind of the minimal
Both of
JS.
them are, I think.
Yeah, yeah, they both are. Um, Dino's Fresh is recently coming up with a version 2 in the near future, and that is also aimed at providing more extensible kind of backend features alongside the existing front end stuff. So that'll be a great option too.
And soon we may have Remix version 3,
Yep, something along those
which, if
lines.
people have not heard, they've stated that they're building it on a fork of Preact. I don't know why they feel the need to fork it.
As they mentioned, they said something along the lines of they want to own the entire experience. They want to build component libraries, Preact, all the stuff. They want to own it completely. So along those lines, and I guess a fork makes sense. We'll have to see what they actually remove or change, or we don't know
Hmm.
yet. I'm not sure they know yet.
Yeah, probably. It seems to me that, like you indicated, that it's more about ownership and control than necessarily making any specific change, at least at this point in time.
Yeah, that's what they've mentioned publicly. At least we'll have to just wait and see.
Okay, then talking about the upcoming version of Preact, when is it coming out and what are we going to get with it?
Sure. So I guess a little backstory first. We are currently on Preact version 10. And version 10 released actually back in October of 2019. It
Wow.
is a very, very long lasting major for Vue libraries in the space. Um, And
Well, to be fair, React, I think the previous version came out in 2018, and the recent version came out recently.
React
Uh,
19 came out in December, 18 a couple years before that. It's definitely not that far back, nor near that far back.
hmm.
I think React 16 came out in 2017.
No, what
So
I'm saying is that around 2018, React kind of got stuck as well. That's what I'm saying. That they
uh,
also had I think, as I recall, a lengthy period of time between releases.
yeah, I know between some of their major releases, they didn't have many breaking changes. So how you count majors is a little bit up in the air. But um, yeah, so Preact 10 came out in 2019, and we've been pretty happy with it since. We had some initial talks about V11, I think, started in 2021 for some breaking changes that we wanted. But we ending up like being able to land most of our changes into Preact due to absolute wizardry by people other than myself, Yovi, Marvin, Andre, uh, Joachim Bet. So we've been able to kind of keep Preact stable for so long without any sorts of breaking changes, which we've been very, very happy with. However, over the years, a number of breaking changes do kind of come up that you put off and you have in your head forever. And that is going to culminate in V11, hopefully within the next couple months. We plan to have an alpha out, I think, about the end of the month. So we'll see where it ends up. But this is going to be not a huge set of breaking changes. We're going to keep it pretty minimal so that everything can be migrated over pretty easily. The biggest thing, at least for me, is we're finally dropping IE11 compatibility. So,
Woo!
yep, back in 2019, that was unfortunately still a. So
I'm
back in
actually kind of shocked that we're even mentioning Internet Explorer.
Yeah, yeah, same here. In 2019, unfortunately, that was a bit more of a sticking point. Some people still needed it for e-commerce and stuff, as much as I hate that. And every now and then, we'd get people coming into the library to say, "Hey, this doesn't work with IE11," or "Hey, you need to use this older method." And every single time, we're like, "Do I really want to look at that PR? Do I really want to look at that issue?" Um, yeah, it's been something that unfortunately has been there forever, and as open source stewards, we don't want to break people's libraries. So we have to keep that compatibility, even if we're not necessarily in love with it. So we're finally killing that off, bumping up to more modern browsers and browser features. So that's great. Um, we're also just kind of slimming out a lot of the core libraries. So the core libraries can drop down size at least a few hundred bytes. So I think it drops down to about 4.4 KB these days. Our React compatibility is going to get better. There's a couple of breaking changes that were in that we couldn't quite land in version X, unfortunately. So we'll be improving compat a bit. And generally just kind of cleaning up internally, dropping out some weight. So
Hmm,
for
cool.
normal users, there shouldn't be too much differences in the way that you use the library. There shouldn't be too many breaking changes. A couple like type switch here and there, and we're dropping a couple kind of very, very fringe features. But in general, there should be no problems for most users. There's going to be no migration times. Just upgrade the version.
So no big philosophical changes like we get in recent React versions.
No. Um, no. At most, we might change up the kind of version or the messaging that we have around our tagline and kind of how we relate to React. But in general, it's going to work the exact same way, the exact same patterns.
And how about, and it's still going to be class components as the core implementation and hooks as an add-on?
Yep. Well, that's not something ever. In general, that's a zero cost abstraction. It doesn't cost us much to have hooks on a separate add-on. So for us, it doesn't really make sense to inline hooks into the main library, especially as some people don't use them. So we're going to keep doing that.
Yeah, to be fair, I do wonder if, because Hooks, first of all, hooks were, for better or worse, hooks were one of the more popular changes that came around about with React. They really popularized that kind of style of front end programming.
Hmm.
Other frameworks adopted similar patterns as well. And consequently, all the documentation, all the people who learned React in recent years went through some boot camp. All that's the method of operation that they learned. All the AI generated code will likely use it. So I am thinking that the world is moving in that direction, like it or not.
Yeah, I mean that is something we offer. All it is a separate import. So you import use state or use reducer from Preact/hooks. Works the same way. It's still bundled with the same package. It's just a subpath export. Um, However, with the advent of signals, that hooks aren't something you necessarily need to use. We do offer kind of alternatives in that space that we would probably start suggesting more heavily in
Hmm.
the next coming or upcoming years, as they generally lead to better experiences in our findings. Um, Hooks look great, but as we've kind of everyone in the React ecosystem has experienced the last few years, they have a lot of problems around DX and certainly user experience.
Yeah.
Um, you have to use a linter with it. That's the only way the React team really allows it to be used, as we saw with kind of some of the Vite recommendation stuff earlier this year, in which they wouldn't suggest Vite unless Vite had ESLint added to all their templates because
Yeah.
you have to use linters to help you with React. You have
The
to use
dependency arrays and stuff like
yeah,
that,
and in more
and avoid
recent
circular updates and
yeah,
whatever.
and in more recent times the compiler, which
Yeah.
also tries to paper over a lot of the hooks issues, adding memoization and all those extra things on top, which
I
also
don't
comes
I
with its
don't know if
own
I would be that blunt. I can appreciate your point of view on this. I'm a bit more lenient towards them. I think that it's interesting that basically we have like two camps of front end development in Vue libraries these days. We have like React with the component based updates and the VDOM in which in the way that they use it,
Mhm.
and on one side, and basically everybody else with signals and grain reactivity more or less on the other side. And that's kind of and I think that Vue is also kind of signal oriented, correct, Steve?
Yeah, when I was a buddy of mine, Eric Hanchett, had done some videos on signals, and I remember as I'm watching him explaining, I'm like, that sounds a lot like how Vuex already works.
Yeah,
Really, it was like I don't know if they borrowed from Vue for signals, or I don't know, how everything originated, but just in listening to descriptions of signals and how they work, I'm like, well, that's how I code with Vuex a lot anyway. You
yeah.
know,
For our signals implementation, VREFs were absolutely a major source of inspiration. Um, we absolutely took some of the ideas that they used, so it works very similarly.
cool.
And now Angular is dropping RxJS in favor of signals as well.
I wouldn't say dropping
Well, they
signals
still
in
support it,
RxJS.
but
RxJS does different focuses than signals. They work differently and kind of target different areas. I think anyone familiar will say that.
yeah, but from what I understood from Angular core team members that I've been speaking with, the direction of the project in general, they're not, well, you can still use RxJS, but the direction that they're moving in is away from RxJS and towards
Yeah,
signals.
yeah. Defaulting to RxJS is, I think, where they're moving away from, to my understanding, anyways.
So, so basically, this version is less about, let's say, what we've been used to with React of here's the big message from on high, and more about cleaning house and putting in all the API breaking changes that accumulated over the past 6 years and doing it like in one fell swoop, in order to minimize the pain of migration.
Pretty much, yeah. That's exactly it. It's an opportunity for us to get in a lot of those changes that users have been asking for, but unfortunately, we've been unable to provide for that time. Um, and in the kind of example you said, we're still in that middle of the continuum from React with the full component model to signals. We are still quite happy sitting in the middle, being able to provide both if we want, and allowing users to use both at the same time if they want. Um, that's still our kind of comfort area and what we'd like to provide users, the opportunity and option to use whatever they feel fits their needs best at that moment.
And in recent years, the web platform itself has gotten some significant enhancements, especially on the CSS side. If we're
Mhm.
looking at things like view transitions and stuff like that, is that something that you integrate with?
It's something we've looked at a little bit. Unfortunately, not too much yet. I'd love to look into it, but just don't have too much time. So I know React has recently produced a view transition like component built into the library that helps facilitate that. We don't yet have anything along those lines. Um, Depending on what you're doing, I think we can work with vanilla view transitions. But there are a couple situations where uh, we would like to improve support and like to provide some better support for those situations, but don't currently yet, unfortunately.
Hmm. Just to give our audience context, and we actually had episodes in the past about view transitions. I don't remember off the top of my head which number. I think we even had Noam Rosenthal, who created the spec, or actually took over the spec from Jake
Mhm.
Archibald on the show to talk about it. It's basically a way of transitioning between pages with using animations that are very similar to what you might experience with native applications. Like if you think about, I don't know, let's say a Netflix type experience where you click on some movie and it expands to cover the entire screen. So instead of just switching from one view to the next, it kind of animates from one to the next. And with view transitions, I think you can now get it for both single page applications and multi-page applications.
I believe so, yeah.
So so it's getting support from the framework itself does, or the view library itself does mean a lot. In this
Yeah.
context, it certainly makes the experience much more seamless.
Yeah. In Preact's case, that means switching, having the user signify that a component switch of conditional rendering or just swapping out in router has to be like synchronous by design to start a transition then end a transition. That unfortunately just isn't something we support at the moment. It's something we'd love to look at, but it's definitely an area that's lacking.
Another thing, by the way, that I think the platform is supporting or about to support is the ability to move live components from one place in
Yes,
the DOM tree to another, which would
that
be
is so
awesome
exciting.
to view libraries.
Yeah, that is super exciting. We have a number of issues open on the Preact tracker and have been open for 7, 8 years where iframes or videos that when they're shifted, they lose all state. Um, and
Basically,
while
the
you,
video starts over.
yeah, exactly. Because unfortunately, there's just no way to move stateful elements at this time reliably, especially for a view library that relies on diffing to figure out where components need to move. There's no algorithm you could possibly use to be correct 100% of the time. We've tried um, all sorts of different solutions that it's unfortunately impossible. So being able to actually move elements is amazing and so exciting. There's
So
going to be so many bugs
are you
that we
familiar
get to
with the
solve.
teleport functionality in Vue 3?
I am not, no.
You should look it up. That's the whole point, is to be able to, dynamically move content from one part of the DOM to the other.
That might be similar to like portals or something in React land. Not sure.
Good.
The bottom line, though, is that at the end of the day, we are getting it from the web platform itself, and ideally, solutions should be built on top of that rather than hack around it. I know that we also spoke with Carson Gross from HTMX. He was trying to use some library that kind of hacked this functionality, and at the end of the day, you just want platform support for it.
Yeah. In that example for us, all it is I think all we need is a try catch that we're going to do I think it's move before is the DOM method. And if that fails, we go back to, inserting before. That
Mm.
is pretty much all the change that we need in Preact, which will absolutely land something like that when we can. That should be
By the way,
easy.
in order to achieve that amazingly small size, do you
Mhm.
minimize by hand or are you using tooling?
Yeah, so we do use a lot of tooling to help do that. You know, tools like Cursor and whatnot are great. We mangle properties to keep a consistent API. So that means things like I don't know, render becomes underscore underscore R, diff underscore underscore B. We do a lot of that kind of work by hand, and we track sizes every single PR, and we have tons of PRs on the Preact library that are just reducing the size by 4 bytes here, 6 bytes there.
Yeah,
A really great days.
people
Oh,
don't realize in userland that even when you minify, a lot of the text that exists in your JavaScript source code or TypeScript source code actually has to stay the way that it is because it's property names. And since properties are looked up by name, they can't be changed. So
yeah.
what you're saying is that you're kind of creating aliases to properties in order to reduce the size of commonly used properties throughout the code.
Exactly. Yes, we have in the Preact code. There's at the base of the repo. There's a mangle .json file which has a mapping for all those properties. So you map properties like render or component diff that go down to short names. On top of that, very
Request
smart people.
animation frame. Here's a short one.
Yeah, not quite that, but in addition to that, very smart people have looked through and seen, okay, of these mangled properties, which ones will never exist alongside each other. So you have 4 or 5 different properties essentially all using the same alias, but they're used in different contexts. There's never over any colliding. But that further
Wow.
reduces the bundle size because you have, underscore underscore B that could be used in 3 different contexts, which is, fewer
Wow.
bytes with modern gzipping compression. Yeah, there's been a lot of work that's done into that, and we have tons of PRs of reducing by a handful of bytes or exploring a handful of bytes. Yeah, tons of time and
That's kind of
effort spent on
I
that.
have to say it's technically amazing, but it seems almost vanity.
To an extent, yeah. It, it is an exercise. Sometimes devs do that where you optimize something by 2% and that feels like a great day. You reduce bytes by 5% and 5 bytes feels like a great day.
It
It's
reminds me of that
something to
competition
enjoy.
of writing games that fit in 1K
Yeah,
and C programs that fit in one line and all sorts of weird things that people
yeah.
used to do.
It does add up over time though. All those efforts, 10 bytes here, 10 bytes there over a couple of years, that does increase what we can offer, and features that we would feel uncomfortable with otherwise, we can fit in because of all that work done in other parts of the library to reduce the size. So there's definitely a reward for it.
Cool. What are you looking at for the future? I mean, if you're thinking about where you would like this library to go, what are you thinking about?
Yeah. So a couple other people have been interested in frameworks and offering something more along the lines of a full stack framework. We don't really have anything planned there just yet. It is in the investigation phase, and some people are quite interested in offering something along those lines. We are trying to figure out, I guess, in a large way, the future of the React compatibility. For the past 6, 7 years, we have been defined by our React compatibility. That's been the major selling point, that we could just be dropped into existing React apps. But as React aims more for concurrent features and full stack framework, um, server components and whatnot, we are starting to kind of look at, okay, how do we differentiate ourselves? What can we offer instead that fulfills the same use cases or same problems that people are having, but in that we feel is a subjectively better experience or better fits our use cases anyhow. So we're starting to look at various options along those lines too. We'll always look at getting smaller and faster, as it comes, but we're kind of open just seeing where it goes right now. Our growth has ballooned like crazy over the past couple of years. So we're assuming that most users are pretty happy with the current direction. So we're kind of just keeping at it, seeing, keeping our options open, and seeing what users want.
So I kind of when we were talking about integration with frameworks, I kind of
Mhm.
neglected this question. When I use it with either Astro or Fresh was the other one, I think.
Yep.
Do I get SSR, server side rendering?
Yep. That's how they all work. They do.
And you have the ability to do hydration on Preact code. So
Yep.
hydration capabilities are built into the Preact library.
Yep. Just as it would with React or Vue or anything else, you can have those islands of interactivity where you have static content with little bits of Preact here and there. You can do full page hydration, server-side rendering, streaming. That's all built in and available.
Cool. And one of the, I'll mention it in my picks, but I'm actually going to be giving a talk soon at the conference. I gave one, and I'm going to be giving this a variation on the same talk in another conference about how more and more frameworks are adopting RPC type approaches for
Mhm.
communication in the full stack scenario for communication between the front end and the back end. In the case of Preact, do you have anything built in, or would I be using something like TRPC? What would be the or you don't recommend this type of approach at all, maybe?
No, we don't have any opinions on that at the moment. How you do it is kind of outside the what we consider to be Preact's concerns. I think Astro has something along those lines. I'm not 100% sure, but in general, we don't have any opinion on that. And you can use tools like TRPC or any other implementation that you'd like.
Cool. Steve, anything else you would like to add or ask?
No, I think I'm good for now. Like I said, not big React user, so not real big into the world. Just where it interacts with Vue or intersects with Vue.
Yeah, I would say that if you ever want to try out something other than Vue, then I think that Preact might be more aligned with your point of view than React.
And we do. I think I can tease something. We do have something coming along the lines which might be a little bit more interesting to folks who are interested in Vue and Svelte and whatnot. Um,
Can you elaborate?
Not too much, but we are. It's been teased a couple times by Jason in the last month or so, but we have something coming along the lines which might tickle that fancy a little bit better than
Okay,
JSX and
maybe
whatnot.
then we'll need to bring you on again or somebody else from your team to talk about it if and when it actually materializes.
Yeah, it's been something that Jason has been working on for years, and there's a number of public implementations of it or tweaks, but it'll be interesting.
Is there anything that you would like to add about Preact, Ryan?
Yeah, I think we've covered most of the main stuff.
Okay, then I'm also done from my perspective.
Alrighty. So with that, we'll move on to picks. Picks are part of the show where we can talk about anything we want. At least that won't get us censored by the FCC. So, Dan, you want to go first?
Okay, so I have a couple of picks. First and foremost, I'll be speaking at two upcoming conferences. I don't know if they'll happen before or after this episode actually airs, but for people listening to the live stream, they'll certainly happen after because they're in the future. The first one is they're both in Tel Aviv. They're actually back to back, day after day. So I'll be speaking at both of them. The first one is called React Next. It started as a React conference, but has kind of evolved or matured into a general front-end development conference, and it's now Israel's largest front-end development conference. There are about over 1,000 attendees, and this year I'll be keynoting it.
Wow.
So,
Oh, nice.
yeah, so I'm really excited about that. And that will happen on June 25th. I think they're actually sold out of tickets. So, unfortunately, even if people listening are interested in going, they can join the waiting list, but I don't think they can actually buy tickets at this point in time. And the day after, in the exact same venue in Tel Aviv, is the No TLV conference, which is, as its name implies, a conference about everything having to do with the Node and the backend usage of JavaScript. And I'll be speaking at that conference as well, not keynoting it this time. Our friend Josh Goldberg will be keynoting it, talking about tooling, modern tooling, and stuff like that, which will should be really interesting. And I'll be speaking about in that conference. I'll be speaking about using heap dumps in order to analyze performance issues and memory leaks and stuff like that, which should be fun as well. So it'll be interesting to talk back, back to back in two conferences. That one might actually still have tickets. Let me check. Um, yeah, you can buy the last minute tickets, a bit more expensive, but wait for the last minute, then that's what you get. But if somebody wants to join, apparently they still can. So that would be my first pick. My other pick was the fact that I actually recently spoke at a conference. I spoke at the JS Heroes conference in Cluj, Romania. It was a great conference. If you get an opportunity in the future to attend or speak at that conference, I highly recommend it. It's a community driven conference. And they do blind selection, so there's no benefit in being well known or less known as a speaker. You just need to come up with an interesting topic. The lineup was amazing. The talks were great. Well, amazing, and also me. uh, and the talks were great, and the organization was top notch. And I can only say great things about it. They took us to dinners. They hosted us, the speakers, in this picnic in the woods, which was great. It was just a lot of fun. And my last pick is it. As I mentioned, that conference took place in Cluj, Romania. So my last pick would be Romania itself, because we took the opportunity, my wife and I, to tour Romania a bit, both before and after the conference. So we drove through places like obviously Bucharest, which is the capital of Romania, but also Brasov and Sighișoara and Sibiu and Cluj, which I mentioned. And Romania is a lovely country, has great outdoors in terms of the Carpathian Mountains, and there are a lot of castles there, including Dracula's castle, known as Bran Castle, and there are other lovely castles there, and a lot of historical towns and cities and places to visit. And it's just a lovely place, and I recommend visiting there if you have the opportunity to do so. And those would be my picks for today.
Alrighty, I will go next. And before I get to the highlight of every episode, at least the ones that I'm on, there's an interesting announcement from Evan Yu of Vue and Beat fame. If you don't know, recently he started at a company called Void Zero with the goal to sort of build a unified tool set for build processes and so on. And one of the things they're doing is in the original Vite, they used rollup. They just incorporated rollup to do the build process. And they said that they were going to start building their own version of that called roll down. Obviously, sort of a play on that. And as of about a week ago, May 29th, as of this recording, they have a product called Roll Down Vite, which is Vite with the initial build of their Rust powered roll down tool. So if you want to test it out, you can
Seems
just
that all modern JavaScript tooling is heading the way of either Go or Rust.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
Right.
yeah, interesting.
Yes.
I have to say about this as an aside that I mentioned before that the front-end framework world is kind of divided between React using component level updates and everybody else going with signals. It seems that the in terms of bundling, you've got Next.js going with their thing, and everybody else going with Vite. So
Pretty
it's
much.
really interesting. Again, this kind of split that we're seeing in the market.
All right. What is next tool that they're using? I've forgotten. I know I've
They're
seen it.
using TurboPack, I think it's called.
TurboPack.
TurboPack,
Right.
yep.
Okay. Right. So yeah, Vite has certainly taken the world by storm since at least the front end development world,
Yeah, everybody
since it
else
came
is
in.
using it.
It's fast. I love it.
Mhm.
Anyway, so that tool's out if you want to take a look at that and play with that.
By the way, and everybody else includes most React projects.
Okay, so dad jokes of the week. So recently, a friend of mine texted me, said, "What are you doing now?" And I said, "Probably failing my driving test." Right. So I was texting back. Went to my doctor the other day. I told him, "Doctor, I have a ringing in my ear." He says, "Whatever you do, don't answer it."
That reminds me of this guy that goes to the doctor and says, Doctor, when I put my finger on my shoulder, it hurts, and on my leg, it hurts, and
Right.
on my stomach, it hurts." It says, "Of course, your finger is broken."
Right. Exactly. The alternative answer to that is, well, don't touch them there. And then finally, I'm not a coffee drinker, but my daughter is, so I've observed this. And they say some people stir their coffee with the right hand, others use their left hand, but most are normal and just use a teaspoon. So those are the dad jokes of the week. Ryan, what do you got for us?
Sure. So unfortunately, I've been in the nightmare realm that is source maps for the past couple of weeks.
Oh, wow.
So
I'm
yeah,
sorry.
so yeah. So I guess one of my picks is Evan Wallace, the creator of ESBuild, has this source map visualization tool on the web where you can upload a bundle and a source map, and it kind of maps out really nicely color coded, so you can figure out which function goes to which source map bit and whatnot. That has been an absolute lifesaver over the past couple of weeks as I debug some plugins that haven't quite set up their source maps correctly, so everything gets mangled and broken and awful. So Evan Wallace's tool is brilliant for that.
It's my understanding that we are kind of slowly moving in the Well, I'll backtrack. People don't necessarily realize that there's no standard for source maps, and they kind of happened. And per my understanding, we're kind of moving in the direction of finally getting some sort of official standard for source maps.
Yeah, I mean, there has been a spec for years. I'm not sure how official it was. I know it's becoming, I guess, more official recently. I know there's been, I think, some TC39 work on it recently, but I don't know about the historic kind of background there.
I have to mention this. First of all, we probably should have an entire show just on source maps at one point or another. And I recently found something really amusing. So, as I mentioned, both the talk that I gave and the one that I'm about to give as a keynote are about RPC and modern frameworks. And I've been speaking with Rich Harris. I've been effectively speaking about RPC with all the framework creators, more or less.
Mhm.
And I've been speaking with Rich Harris about it, and he raised some security concerns that he has around RPC. And one of them is that with co-located code, when you've got both front-end code and back-end code located in the same file, and you're counting on the bundler to make that separation, so only the client-side code actually gets downloaded down. And he said that that potentially creates a false sense of security because you might keep some secrets in the backend code, assuming that it's fine because it just stays on the backend. But then you get something like source maps with all the code in its source form downloaded to the client. So if you've done the bad thing of embedding, let's say, your AWS key or whatever in your backend code because it's just on the backend, well, guess what? It's now in your source map file.
Well, wouldn't it, I mean, isn't the standard to keep that like an environment variable or
Well,
something?
you're supposed to
You
keep it
should.
somewhere. Yeah, you're not supposed to keep it in the source code in any event, but
Right.
there's still a potential assumption that, maybe it's a proprietary algorithm that you don't want to expose or something like that, and you're keeping it on the back end. Well, with co-located code, it can easily find its way to the front end, and source maps are one reason why that might happen.
Yeah, I know that came up a lot when Next.js started doing the server components thing, but I haven't even thought about that or heard anything about it since. That's interesting.
Ideally, what you would want to do in a scenario like that is when generating the source maps file, I think you would want to do something like the type stripping that we
Yeah,
now
where you
have,
replace it with
like
spaces or something.
overwrite with spaces that entire backend code,
Yeah.
something like that. But,
Hmm.
I don't think anybody's doing that at this point in
Okay.
time.
Alrighty.
Interesting.
So with that, we will end this episode of JavaScript Jabber.
Wait a minute.
Uh-oh.
Don't forget, you need to ask Ryan about how people can contact him.
Oh, yes. And give him
Yeah.
money. That's right. So
Please.
how can people do those things?
Yeah. So on Twitter, X, I am at _RS Christian. And then at Blue Sky, I think I'm rschristian.dev. And on GitHub, I am RS Christian. So pretty consistent. Chat me. You can send me
And
DMs
do you
or
have a
something if you want.
Discord for Preact?
We have a Slack. I think that it's linked on our website, and I think most of our READMEs. I think it's just like chat.slack.app or Preact Slack. I don't know. It's something. We have it advertised everywhere. It should be easy to find if anyone's interested. Yeah, we have a community there. Talk about all sorts of things. Help people with various Preact and non-Preact issues that they have around their tooling and whatnot. So if you have any interest, yeah, join us there.
And Preact is preactjs.com.
Yep.
So, okay. Did I get everything, Dan?
I think you finally did.
Okay. Thanks for the help. Alrighty. So with that, we'll end this episode. Thank you for listening. And thank you, Ryan, for coming on. And we will talk at you next time.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Bye.